All right, so good morning, folks. I get the honor of preaching to y'all this morning, which is fun because it's not that often that I'm here in adult service. And I was telling some people that it's exciting because, yay, adults, people my own age that I can hang out and talk with. But there's also a downside because I'm up here, and there's a little bit of responsibility that comes with writing a sermon and a little bit of nervousness that goes into me being on this stage. But I've prayed, and I'm excited about bringing this message to you this morning because we are in our neighborhood series. And this is a series where we are going through just different texts in the Bible, but trying to take a different type of look at the greatest commandment that Jesus gave to us. And that was in two parts. First was to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second part was to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, a lot of times we kind of get hung up and we view that idea of loving your neighbor as yourself as the metaphorical neighbor, the person that you might bump into while you're out and about, the people that are just around your surroundings. And that's not a bad way to look at it. That's a good way to approach it. But for the sake of this series and for the sake of practicality and us trying to give you guys something to push and look forward towards, we've taken this very literally, and we're specifically talking about your neighbors for this month, the people that you live right next to. The first week we handed out some cards, and we still have some in the back lobby, the cards that have your house in the center and then little boxes for the houses of the people that live directly across the street, directly next to you, and catty corner to you as well. And the purpose of this month has been to try and get us outside of our comfort zones and to the point where we are actually going out and meeting and loving on our neighbors and those people that are around us. And I know for me, just this sermon series and listening to it this month, it sparked a few conversations with the neighbors that I'll get to share with you during the sermon. You might have heard the old saying that good fences make good neighbors. And while this is true, and I can live up to that, I think that that's a good saying. It's not necessarily what we want to be encouraging here for this sermon series. See, it holds a lot of truth because it's very scary sometimes to get outside of your comfort zone and go and meet new people. And whenever it comes to talking about neighbors, there's even an added level of scariness because whenever you go out and meet them, they're going to be there all the time. They're always living right next to you. I can think of like whenever you go on a mission trip, which we plan on doing this summer, going back to Jamaica again, we think that like we've got a week of ministry there and we get to go there and we get to focus on them for a week. And then after that, we come home and we hope that we, were able to form relationships while we were there and build that. But then we get to come home to the nice safety of our own house. We're not in that environment all the time. Whereas if we're talking about the mission field of our neighbors, you don't exactly get to leave at the end of the week. You don't get to cut out at the end of the day because every time you go home, they're right there next to you. So there's just a little bit of added scariness to this idea of going out and meeting your neighbors. So this morning I've been tasked with talking about some of the steps. So again, it's a very, very practical sermon series. So what are some of the steps that we can take in order to get past the sometimes paralyzing fear that some of you guys might have of getting to know your neighbor? And I say paralyzing fear, we're all on like a ranging scale. Some of you guys might be very extroverted, might be very people-oriented people, and some of you might like to stay inside your own comfort zone. And that's just a personality thing. Each and every one of us are different. I tend to lean a little bit more towards the outgoing side of things because I like people, I like being excited, I like to have conversations. Even though whenever I'm up on stage like this, I still get nervous. I still, I'm afraid that I'm going to fumble over my words, and I'm sure that I will. So just bear with me. But we're all on like that different ranging scale. And some of you might be really, really afraid, and understandably, of the idea of starting up a conversation with your neighbors, getting to know your neighbors. And so I kind of want to look at that, and maybe you can relate to an analogy like this. Do any of you guys ever let your house get messy, like really, really messy, to the point where I should have cleaned last week. I should clean this week. I'll clean next week. And then things just keep piling up in every single room, because not that I have a tendency to do this or anything, but sometimes it happens. And then like after weeks go by, you get to the point where you kind of just feel overwhelmed by the fact that every single house of my room is a mess. All right, every single room of my house is a mess, and I've got so much to do, and you just don't know where to start. It's like that paralyzing, ah. I can also think of one thing that has been on my mind a lot is whenever, like the paralyzing fear, one thing that I've been doing with my job for the last couple of months is planning a VBS. Now, this might be news to some of you. It'll be in the announcement video later, but since I get to be up here and I'm preaching, I get to make a plug for whatever I want to because I'm in charge. So, VBS is coming up in a month, and you'll get to hear about that in an announcement. And next week, we're going to have an interest meeting for anybody who might be interested in being a volunteer for it. But whenever it comes to planning something like that, I remember 2 months ago, like sitting in my office, all right, so I know that I want to do VBS this summer. I have to figure out what time it's going to be, what dates it's going to be, if it's going to be morning or afternoon or evening, or what's the theme going to be, and like there's just so many different things that you have to decide when starting something big like that. And I remember feeling overwhelmed, and then I finally picked a date, I picked a theme, picked a time, and then there's still more questions that come, and it's like, we picked a Galactic Starveyor theme, so it's going to be space themed coming up next month. And I'm like, now I'm thinking of questions like, all right, now how many glow-in-the-dark stars do I need to buy in order to make this auditorium really pop? So I just go through tons and tons of questions like that, and at first it can seem very overwhelming, but the first point that I'm going to stress to you, and the first thing to kind of get over that paralyzing fear of something big that's outside of your comfort zone, is to start small. It's simple to say, and it can be simple to do, but the idea of if you guys are too afraid, or if you feel like there's some barriers with the idea of you taking the Great Commandment literally and loving your neighbor as yourself, I want to encourage you to start small. Now, the idea of starting small isn't very motivational. It doesn't get you jazzed up. It's not like, yeah, we're going to start small, because people are impressed by big. People are impressed by wow and things that are going to have a great big impact. For instance, imagine with me a movie scenario where there's a guy, and every day the guy goes home from work to his loving family, and he sits and he has dinner with them, and then he realizes that it's been like 3 weeks that he's procrastinated on cutting the grass. And so he goes outside and he decides, today's the day that I'm going to cut the grass. And he starts cutting the grass. And while he's cutting the grass, he sees a neighbor. And that neighbor is just standing outside. He's trimming hedges by himself. And he decides he's going to go and start a conversation with the neighbor. And so they talk about the weather, and they talk about yard work. And eventually the conversation evolves into sports, because that's what men talk about. And then the movie ends. Wouldn't you just love to go and see a movie like that? Doesn't that just seem like it'd be super awesome and spectacular? Well, actually, maybe you'd be into that kind of movie, I don't know. But I would be incredibly bored during the whole thing, because there's no action, there's no plot, there's no great thrill in the whole thing. And so when I tell you guys to start small as my introductory lesson to you this morning, it seems kind of blah. But I think that even if you wouldn't be excited about the idea of starting small, we have to start somewhere. That's what gets us beyond anybody who happens to be afraid and doesn't know what to do with the 3, 4, 5 weeks that Jonathan and I are up here telling you guys to get out and know your neighbors. Because this is one of those things that we're practical, and we're trying to like tell you to do things. And I've heard some stories in my small group that meets on Tuesday nights. I hear them telling stories about how they've tried to have conversations with people, and we share about what we've talked about and how we've gotten out there. And so I hope that you guys are doing similar things. I hope that you'll be able to share amongst yourselves, and I hope that the things that we're saying up here are getting you to think just a little bit about what you could do to meet a neighbor. And so I'm telling you to start small if you're too afraid, if you don't know what to do. And I want to start out with a Bible passage that'll try and illustrate and go along with this idea of starting small. And so if you guys have a Bible and want to read along with me this morning, we're going to be in John chapter 6. However, I think that the words should also be on the screen. So John chapter 6, verse 1 through 13 is where I'm going to be reading. And it is the story about how Jesus fed the 5,000. So it's one that a lot of us are going to be familiar with. Maybe some of us not so much. But it's the story, and luckily it's got a wow moment. It's got a good thrilling plot to it, because there's this amazing feat that Jesus is able to perform in the story. So it's not going to be, but it's going to have some of the start small beginnings in it that I'll get to point out to you. So let me turn on there to John chapter 6, and I'm going to start reading verses 1 through 13. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs he was performing on the sick. Then Jesus went up onto the mountainside and sat with his disciples. The Jewish Passover feast was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test them, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each one to even have a bite. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. There is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many? Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass at that place, and the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. Jesus took the loaves and gave thanks and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. And when they all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Nothing will be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with pieces of 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. Now, here's a story that's filled with this miraculous event where Jesus is able to feed 5,000 people because he was able to bless this very, very small amount of food. And so the main character here is Jesus, and he rightfully so, because he's the one that's doing this miraculous thing. He's the one that's behind the prayer and being able to help distribute all of this. However, Jesus left it up to the disciples to be the ones that were doing the distributing, and he was the one that asked them in the first place, how are we going to feed these? And that's kind of interesting of Jesus to do, because he's like, so guys, what's your plan going to be? And the Bible mentions that he knows what's going to happen in the end. And so it's just this extraordinary story, and Jesus is able to do this miraculous thing. However, the character that I would like to focus on for this purpose of the talking about the small beginnings and how we can start small is one character who doesn't even have a name in the story. However, he's mentioned in 3 out of the 4 gospel stories that this story is told. It is the boy. In the story, they're all gathered on this hill, they're lounging. Jesus has a huge crowd of people with him that have come to hear him speak, which is an uncommon occurrence. People were constantly flocking to Jesus to hear the lessons that he was going to tell. And they're all gathered here, and apparently nobody had planned for lunch or dinner for these people. So they're all here, and they're far away from their homes, their communities, so they couldn't just go home, and they also couldn't go to the local Kroger or shopping district in order to buy food for them all. And so they're kind of in this conundrum of what are we going to do? And there's even added little bit of tension, because once people get hungry and there's a big crowd, you might get a little bit hangry when you're hungry. There's a combination between angry and hungry, and so this big mob of people, and they haven't eaten all day, and so there's a chance that what if they start revolting against us? But Jesus, he's got a plan. He's calm over the whole thing. And so they start trying to figure out how are we going to feed this people. And we've got Philip, he's the numbers guy. He starts calculating the cost. And he's like, oh man, if we had 200 denarii, 8 months' wages, we couldn't even give everybody a bite of bread. So we need even more, we need a couple years' wages in order to pay for all of this food. And Andrew, he's trying to be practical in this story. He goes around, he's trying to take inventory of what they do have. It's like, all right, so I've got to start somewhere, what do we have? And that's when he comes across the boy. Now, the boy is a character who just happens to be there, and he has the attitude to offer up what it is that he has. A couple loaves of bread and a couple of fish. And to me, this story, it reminds me of working with kids. A lot of times when adults are talking about money stuff, maybe saying that I'm trying to save up for a house or for a car, and you talk about money things, and I've had kids offer, well, I could help pay for it. I've got some money saved up. Let me go get it for you. And they reach into their pockets and they pull out 2 quarters, a dime, and a button, and they're like, here. This is for you. And you get oh, thanks. You're so very kind. And they are very kind for sharing what they had. But in the adult mindset, you're thinking this is more hassle. Now I just have to keep up with change. And so I hate having change on me. It jingles in my pocket and I'm walking. So I normally just throw it in the cup holder of my car and it just accumulates there for years. So I think that it's almost like something such small would just okay, well, what are we going to do with that? And Andrew and the other disciples are okay, so this bread, we can pass it out to us, we could eat it, or maybe like one group over there, this could feed them, but it is so lacking that I'm sure a lot of those disciples were like, what is this going to be able to do for us? It doesn't solve our problem at all. And so, out of that story, I think that it's really impressive because God can take that small, that ordinary offering that a lot of the other disciples probably thought like that's nothing, and he was able to use that to do so much with it because this one little boy was willing, had the gumption in him to offer what it was that he had. Now, and that's my next bullet point for you guys, is that whenever we're talking about small beginnings and taking baby steps, then maybe whenever it comes to getting to know your neighbor, maybe you can just give what you have. I'm not talking necessarily about you having to give money or fish or a couple quarters to your neighbor, but give what you have. And maybe you're thinking you don't have a lot to offer. Maybe you don't have a lot of free time. We had a sermon on time barriers and sharing with your neighbors a couple weeks ago. So maybe you're terrible with names, and even if you get your card and even if you write the names down, you still feel like you don't really know them. Maybe you're an incredibly introverted person, and the idea of making eye contact with a neighbor that you don't know frightens you. And these all might be very true, that you don't have a lot to offer. That could be true. We are all lacking. We are all deficient in some way. And now my sermon's kind of sounded like a downer, but there's more, because even if we are lacking, even if we don't have a whole bunch to give, God can use whatever it is you do have if you're willing to give it, if you're willing to put yourself out there and get to know that neighbor, if you're willing to put yourself out there and take that next step in faith. God can use what you give him in order to do great things. But you're not going to get that opportunity unless you do it, unless you give. A lot of the times in the Bible, people will offer what they have to Jesus, and he will in turn give them even more than they could have expected. And I think it's kind of the same for us too. If we can be people that pray for our neighbors and ask him to help give us a heart that is open and willing to get to know people and willing to take those next steps, then if we can pray for that, then I believe that God can do things that are way outside of your comfort zone. That he can do things that are much bigger than maybe you even thought that you could do. Because if you're willing to just start and give what you have, then a lot of great things can happen. Now, if you give what you have, then Jesus, just like in this Bible story, he can take it and he can multiply it just like he did with the fishes and the loaves. But it all starts with an offering of what you do have. Now, along these same lines, I have a second part to that bullet point, which is this. You can't do everything, just do something. Again, if you happen to be taking the approach that it's a big, overwhelming thing and kind of paralyzing with fear, where do I start? Well, let all of you know this, that you can't do everything, and it's not up to you, and it's not your responsibility to go and become best friends with every neighbor on your street. It's not your responsibility to become best friends with just the people that are right next to you. It's your responsibility to try. So just do something. Again, I'm just talking about baby steps here. I'm trying to give you guys encouragement on how to step outside of maybe your current comfort zone and see what could possibly come next. Now, we all assume that somebody else is the expert whenever it comes to like talking to neighbors. Maybe somebody else is better equipped. Maybe Aaron, the youth minister, he has a Bible degree and he's so good with his words and he's very handsome, so he would be a great person to go out and talk to the neighbors. But me, I don't have the knowledge, I'm not that confident, my hair doesn't look as good, and those things might be true. But you guys can do something still. You might think that somebody else is more willing or more able to share Jesus, share love, and become friends with those people that are next door to you. But I've got like a question for you. What if God puts you there on your street next to those people for the reason of getting to know your neighbors? Now, I believe that God has a grand plan in all things, and maybe you being at your house makes you the best person qualified, the best equipped person to share love with those people because you live right next to them. Maybe that could be true. This is just something that you could potentially think about. What if God picked you to be your neighbor's neighbor? In which case, you would be the most qualified. The second big heading to this sermon series, or to this sermon that I'm doing on baby steps, would be called hospitality. Now, I'm a hospitable person. I remember in Bible college taking the spiritual gifts and aptitudes test, and one of the highest things that I ranked on was hospitality. And that's just something that I really love. I enjoy having company. There's a small group that I have that we're part of, some people in the church here. We meet on Tuesday nights. I love it, having the opportunity to host it. I love having people over to our house. Last week, we had a missionary friend who went to college with Tasha and I, who some of you might know, Claire Dorr. She stayed at our house for 5 days last week. And I really love those opportunities to host people, to have them in my house. And again, that's a personality thing too. That's something that I scored high on my personality spiritual giftings test, hospitality. And just part of being hospitable, and it's just something that warms me inside. It's something that I personally love to do. And so, but still, even though I really like having people over to my house and I enjoy getting to know people, don't let that fool you. I am still a big scaredy cat whenever it comes to talking to strangers. Like fortunately my job forces me to be good at saying hi and greeting new people, because on Sundays if somebody comes in, I'll be like, hey, I'm glad you're here, and I love that aspect of it. But still on the inside, I'm a person that's like, oh man, they're meeting a new person. Don't mess up. Say good things. Tell them everything that they need to know. Don't say too much. Don't be too weird. Be a little bit more, I don't know, nice, kind, or something like that. And so I've got all of these things in my head every time that I meet somebody new too. So even if I enjoy that hospitality thing, but whenever it comes to me reaching out and meeting new people, it's still difficult. But I'll tell you what. I want to share something that I would do in a small group. I want to share some of the practical experiences that I've experienced through the last couple of weeks of going through this sermon series, because it has made me think in a new way. It has made me think about my neighbors and how I can better get to know them. For instance, 2 weeks ago, I came home from work, and there's a mud puddle that accumulates in my driveway whenever it rains, which is a problem that I'm trying to fix, and I'm working on it. But some of the neighborhood kids, they rode their bikes through it that day and splashed mud all over my garage door. Now, I could care less, whatever. It probably would have been fun. I would have joined them if I had been there. But I got home and the garage door is covered in mud because these kids were peeling out in it. And I didn't think anything of it. About 10 minutes after I was home, I hear a knock at the door, and it's these 4 kids, and one of them, I'm pretty sure, was told by his mother that he had to come and apologize. So he knocks on the door, and he's like, we're sorry for splashing mud on your garage. And I'm like, dude, it's okay. Don't do it again. But I'm not mad. Thank you for coming and apologizing. It was a nice thing. I shut the door, and as I was shutting the door, actually, one of the kids in the back who didn't say anything to me, he was like, whew, I thought he was going to be mad. So I laughed at that as I'm in the house. And then 5 minutes later, I'm thinking, all right, I'm in this sermon series on getting to know my neighbor, and I think this is an opportunity. Maybe God sent these kids to splash mud on my garage door. Because I had this mentality to be open, I went and I'm like, okay, I can maybe get these kids to clean off the garage door. Again, 5 seconds with a hose and it would have been done. But I'm thinking, how can I build relationships with these kids and get to know their parents? So I go outside with a bucket, and I look for them, and they'd already ridden their bikes down the streets, but I think I know where they live. And so I walk over to a house, and I knock on the door, and the dad answers, and I'm like, hey, I think that some kids that live here just came over to my house because they had splashed mud on my driveway door, and I figured that you had told them to come and apologize, and I just wanted to say that I appreciate it. And Dad's looking at me, and he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Who are you? And I'm like, oh man. Okay, this is where the awkward part comes in, because I went to that, I thought I had a purpose. I thought you would be on the same page as me. I thought you sent the kids, and I'm there in the moment. I'm like, you don't know what I'm talking about? All right, let me explain. And so I did it, and it's not a terrible thing, but it's one of those things that you're putting yourself out there, going to meet neighbors, and what I thought was us going to be on the same page, we really weren't. And so I got to sit and talk there with him, and I met Casey and Will and Cassandra. people that lived at that house, and that's not my neighbor, it's my neighbor's neighbor. And so I was like, okay, I got to meet them, and really, again, I say this because this is one of those things where it's like, that wasn't a blockbuster story. There's no thrill there other than my heart beating when the guy said, "Who are you? Like, what are you talking about?" Like, it's just a very mild, simple thing, but because of things like that and putting myself out there, I have seen these opportunities. I now am aware of different chances where I can put myself out there, where I can go and meet neighbors. And that's something that I'm pretty sure that if this sermon series wasn't going on, that kid would have knocked on my door, and maybe I could have thought to go and help him wash it off, but I probably would have just closed my door and that'd be the end of it. But instead, I was able to turn it into just, now I know the neighbors' names. Maybe more can come from that. I don't know yet, but I'm still willing to experience what else could come from it. And it's just cool to have a slightly tuned, slightly changed mindset whenever you come to these things. These are the baby steps that I'm talking to. Another example is my wonderful wife, Tasha. She went and cut out the grass 2 weeks ago because I really hate cutting grass. I'll do it every now and then, but I really hate cutting the grass. And so she was able to do it for me. And while she was out there, the same kind of thing happened. The neighbor was, one of the neighbors was like pacing back and forth, waiting for a tow truck to come with his car. And so she, because we were in the sermon series, she could have just continued on mowing the grass, doing what we had to do, and then come back inside and rest. But instead, she stopped what she was doing, went over and talked to them, and now we know Kyle and his family as well. It's just cool that because you've got a mindset, something that's slightly different, and take a baby step, I mean, we're opening up doors. We now know 4 more neighbors than we knew 2 weeks ago, which is awesome. I don't know what's going to come from it, but I'm excited to have the opportunity to be used by God. Now I've got a fill in the blank for you. I'm going to transition for a little bit because I'm getting into some of the practicality, one of the practical issues in the hospitable thing. And so I need you to fill in, hold on one second. Yeah, fill in the blank. When the gospel says, the Son of Man came, blank, there are 3 different areas where the gospels fill that in. 3 different times it says, the Son of Man came to. And so I'm trying to use my Bible college brain earlier this week, and like, what does it say? And there are 3 different areas that it talks about the Son of Man and what his mission was. And so the Son of Man in verse 13:45 came not to be served, but to serve. There's one example. The second one, Luke 19:10, the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. So here are 2 examples of some popular memory verses that you might remember of some of the purpose statements of what Jesus did, why he came. He came to serve and to seek. And here's the other one that I like. The third example in the Gospels, the Son of Man came in Luke 7:34, eating and drinking. Period. Because in the Gospel of Luke, there's a biblical scholar named Robert Parris. He said, in Luke's Gospel, Jesus is either going to a meal, at a meal, or coming from a meal. So many different times in Jesus' ministry, the way that he chose to be present with the people that were around him is he sat and he had a meal with them. And so I think that in Scripture, there's nothing that's more biblically documented than Jesus showing relational discipleship through food. And I can get on board with that because I like to eat. And so there's just so many examples of Jesus going and inviting people over to have meals with him, dinners, lunches, just hanging out and eating. And that's one of the things that formed him in a really tight-knit group with his 12 disciples. It's one of the Last Supper is one of the things that we celebrate, him having a meal with them. And so as one of the practical ideas that you could maybe start toying around in your mind of hospitality is, can you think of somebody that you could invite over to your house for a dinner? I know that's one of the things that might sound crazy to you at first, and so maybe I can give you a baby step. Can you think of somebody here at church that you would be willing to go and have lunch with after church? And then after that, maybe you could invite somebody that you know, a friend, somebody that you're already friends with who hasn't been over to your house, invite them over to your house for a lunch or a dinner. And then maybe you could get to the point where you could invite one of the neighbors, somebody that lives right next to you. And there's a really good practicality in it because you eat food, and the people that live right next to you probably eat food. And you probably eat food around the same time, so it's just something that works. And so that's one thing that, because Jesus' ministry makes it an example of having meals with people so often, that I thought that I would mention it. Now, pulling back from that specific idea of having lunch with people or dinner with neighbors, I want to give another broad idea of something that I've talked about in like one of the main purposes of this, is I want you guys to open your eyes to those around you. That's the baby step that I feel like can initiate so much whenever it comes to showing love to your neighbor. By opening your eyes, opening your heart, opening yourself to the possibility that you could be friends, that you could put yourself out there for these neighbors, so much can come from that. And the thing is that unless you do that, if your eyes are closed and if your heart's not open to the idea, then nothing's going to happen. But if you open your eyes and start to notice your neighbors, when I noticed that those boys came splash mud, and I thought, oh, this is an opportunity. When the neighbor was out cutting or clipping hedges or waiting for the tow truck while Tasha was cutting the yard, when she noticed that he was there, there's an opportunity. If you don't have your eyes open, then you're not going to notice. The first step could just be an openness to a friendship with your neighbors. Having your eyes open leaves you just open to the possibility and lets you know maybe the lives and the needs of the people that are around you, and so much can come from that. Now, as a qualifier for just the idea of opening your eyes up to the neighbors around you, you don't have to love everybody around you with everything that you have. That's one of the unrealistic expectations that I don't want you to be afraid of. Whenever it comes to opening yourself up, even Jesus was friends with everybody. He taught so many people, but the book that Jonathan and I are going through for this sermon series calls it The Art of Focusing. He narrowed his vision. He was friends with everybody, and then he had his 12 disciples that he really connected with, that he really taught. And then from that, he even had 3 of those disciples that he was best friends with and that he really invested an extra amount of time into. And so with this idea of opening yourself, don't think that you need to be 100% giving and on all the time for everybody in your neighborhood or everybody that you meet, but start with the idea of being open to those around you and be able to narrow your focus on those that you see God working in their lives. Because if you can put yourself to a place where you at least are an acquaintance with somebody, then maybe you can identify something from that point. Maybe you can move deeper and things can come from it. Now, as I wrap things up, the band's going to come back on stage, and I'm going to pray, and we're going to get ready to just continue to talk about these baby steps, because we have some great opportunities ahead of us. You know, summer is here pretty much. And summer is one of those great times because people are outdoors. Your street might be filled with kids playing, with people doing yard work. You don't have the added fear of going and knocking on somebody's door, because that's a terrifying thing, I understand. Because they might just be outside. Maybe you could use those opportunities to hook up with them and just to get to know them a little bit better. Now, I hope that many of us can go from strangers to acquaintances to friends with the people around us, with our neighbors. And I want to challenge you with that fact. And so I also want to challenge you one last time to pray for your neighbors. With this idea of being open your eyes to seeing the things around you and open to having a friendship with your neighbors, I want you to pray for them, because it's amazing how God can answer prayers and do things that are even bigger than you might have expected. For example, with the boy who gave what he had, just a tiny amount of fish and loaves, God was able to do so much more than the boy or any of the disciples could have expected. And it's amazing how God can answer prayers and provide opportunities if your heart and eyes are open to those that are around you. Would you guys please pray with me? And then after my prayer, we're going to continue on with some songs and some singing. And if you guys want to make a next step, if you want to think about the baby steps or talk it over with somebody like me or an elder, then we're going to be here, because we just want to continue to support and encourage you all through that. Will you please pray with me? God, I thank you for just the opportunity to be here, to live in this world where we have people that are around us. God, some of us might be more outgoing than others, and some of us might be more introverted, and that's completely fine, Lord. I pray that you would just work with each and every one of us to have an open heart and an open mind to fulfilling your commandment of loving our neighbors as ourselves. God, please be with us. Help us to be people that pray for our neighbors. Help us to have eyes that are open towards them, and help us to be able to work on ourselves as well, to figure out what is the next step that we could take. And God, I hope that none of us can get too overwhelmed with this idea of following you or listening to your commands. Help us to understand what the baby steps are. Help us to just continue to grow closer and closer to loving you. God, I thank you, I praise you for this day. It is through Jesus' holy and precious name that I pray. Amen.